I'm going to introduce them all very briefly. Again, you have their longer bios in your packet, but let me just briefly do that. I'm not sure I'll have you all in the right order, but Dr. Mary Futrell, Dean Emeritus and Professor of the Graduate School of Education and Human Development here at GW, and former President of the National Education Association, and a real leader in shaping education reform and implementation in the United States, who also led much of the NEA's MDG work. Jenny Russell, Director of Global Development Policy and Advocacy with Save the Children. Jenny is very well known in the SDG terrain, and Save the Children is obviously a major service organization that does extensive work internationally as well as domestically through Save US, especially in early childhood education, women's capacity building, and development advocacy. Pat Morris, CEO of Women Thrive Worldwide. Pat is a powerful advocate for women and girls' leadership and agency in tackling inequality, discrimination, and poverty, and very thoughtful about these issues in both a global and a U.S. context. Karen Burns, Dr. Karen Burns, Manager for Global Giving Accounts and Business Development at TOMS. TOMS, as you may know, is a real pathbreaker as a company with a unique model of giving back to the world, and has very interesting experience about how a U.S. company can connect products, sales, and philanthropy in the context of development. Zazma Latif, Director of Bread for the World Institute. Bread for the World is exceptional in how it works both internationally and domestically on hunger, and we welcome the invaluable insights you will have for all of us about your experience in working with local and global linkages. And Bruce McNamer, President and CEO of the Community Foundation for the National Capital Region. Bruce has well-known experience in service delivery internationally. He knows the philanthropic world well and has gone deep on many issues from education reform to agriculture, and we look forward to your particular thoughts on how SDGs can catalyze and support local philanthropic, nonprofit, and community work here in the DC area. Just one very quick word by way of introduction to kind of recap the world we're now in. I think, as Tony so eloquently explained, we really are at the beginning of an extremely important shift on the development landscape and in terms of almost every policy community, domestically and internationally, that we can think of. We're moving from the MDGs to the SDGs. We're moving to a universal agenda. We're giving powerful new attention and political momentum behind issues of inequality. There's new attention to drivers of change and root causes, whether it's women's equality and empowerment, inclusive growth, governance, energy, the interlinkage across issues, new recognition of multiple stakeholders and their role in solutions, and just a powerful new opportunity for and fact of ownership from countries, from communities, from citizens, sectors, and truly you've heard many people, including Tony, talk about this being such an inclusive process. I think it is empirically and in every other way the most inclusive process the United Nations has ever hosted and seen. So it's a brave and exciting new world, and we're really thrilled to have this panel to help talk through some of the local and global linkages in particular. I'm going to start with just a question to each of the panelists in turn to get things started. I'd ask you a little bit to reflect on how this agenda creates opportunities for your organization and the kind of work you do as well, but feel free to use this question as an opportunity also to raise any other issues you want to at the start of our conversation. Let me start first, Mary, with you. I'd like to start. You're a real champion and leader in the field of education. And in the UN's My World survey, which, as many of you know, tried to canvass globally the perspectives and views of citizens worldwide and has tabulated more than 8.5 million votes from people around the world about their priorities in the new global goals. And education, hands down, was the #1 priority across geographies in general. This also mirrors what I believe UNA, USA has heard in the consultations that they organized around this country. So let me ask you, from an educator's perspective, what do you see as kind of top of the agenda to strengthen education in the U.S. and globally, and how does this framework help us do that?
Well, first of all, Ambassador, thank you, and thank everyone for inviting me to come and to be part of this very important discussion. And I would like to thank the NCA for sponsoring this event. When I reflect on education, let me start globally, and then I'll move nationally and locally. I reflect on education at the global level. Unfortunately, in 2015, we still have about 750 million people who are considered to be illiterate. And of that number, we have about 75 to 100 million who have never been inside of a school. And when I share that information with my students, and I am still a teacher, they're shocked. They find in 2015, you mean there are people in the world who've never been inside of a place called school? And I said, yes, that happens all over the world. And most of those individuals are not in school because they're in areas where there's conflict or because of poverty. And they're simply not having the opportunity to go to school. But that's not simply an issue that's related to areas of conflict or areas where are poor countries, developing countries. It's also a problem here in the United States. We do provide universal education for all children. Every child has a right to go to school until the age of about 16 or 18. But if you look at a study that just came out by the Southern Education Foundation that talks about the change in demographics, look at the fact that almost 30% of the children in the public schools in the United States live in poverty. And when I looked at this area, which is one of the most stable areas in the country financially, economically, 51% of the students in D.C., the nation's capital, live in poverty. 43% of the children in Maryland live in poverty. 39% of those from my home state of Virginia live in poverty. We also look at the change in demographic that now a majority of the children in the United States are minority. And so when I raise those points, the point I'm really making is we cannot afford not to educate all children and educate them well. And let me share another statistic with you. There are 7.3 billion people in the world. 317 million live in the United States. That means we make up 4.4% of the total world population. If we want to be a world leader by 2030, we can't afford to ignore the children in 2015 who are in our schools, who are our children. They must receive a quality education. And when I think about these schools that we have, it's not that we're not trying to educate everyone. Other countries are investing more in education than we are, so they're rising and we're staying flat. And so when I think about the goals, and I was very impressed with the goals, one of the first things that went through my mind was education is the foundation for every single goal on this list. How well we educate our people will determine whether we'll achieve the other 16 goals and how those goals will impact us. And so when I think about the country and what we need to do, and I think about the world, let me just focus on the U.S. first. One of the things I think President Obama has proposed that's absolutely correct is he's proposing universal preschool for all children. We have children who come to school, and just because you're poor doesn't mean you can't learn. You can't be educated. I was one of those children, single parent, poor home, and I started working when I was 12 years old. But my mother told me to stay in school. And she said, if you stay in school and educate yourself, people can take away your car, your house, whatever, but they can't take your education away from you. And who would have ever thought that Seymour, my nickname was Seymour, but Seymour Holes and You Do Clothes, would ever be sitting here talking to you about education. And so one of the things I think we need to understand is that we do need to give all children an opportunity to be educated and to receive a quality education. And we have to start with preschool, making sure those children are ready for school. Because a lot of children come to school, it's not that they can't learn, they're not ready. And so they're behind. So President Obama has proposed that we provide universal preschool for all children in the United States of America, beginning at the age of 4. I would like to suggest that we start at the age of 3. Now we have to get the money to do that. I believe that we also need to make sure we have high standards, clearly defined standards for all children. And again, just because you're poor doesn't mean you can't learn. Just because you're a minority doesn't mean you can't learn. Set the standards high and help the children meet those standards. Another challenge we are facing in the U.S. is we're facing the challenge of how do we get enough teachers and how do we keep the teachers. Right now, 52% of the teachers in this country are eligible to retire. That's 1.7 million teachers. How are we going to replace them? And how are we going to keep them? And with teachers who are coming in, they're only staying for 5 years, 50% leave. So it means to me it's an opportunity to look at the profession and what do we need to do to change the profession, to make it more attractive, to make it more rigorous, and to make sure that the teachers have the pedagogical skills in order to teach this diverse student population and help them achieve the goals, the educational goals they need to achieve. And when we look around the world, we need to do the same thing. We need to make sure that schools are available to children regardless as to where they live and who they are. We need to make sure we have teachers who are well prepared professionally to teach those children. We need to make sure we have a clearly defined curriculum so that the children understand what it is they're supposed to be learning and that they have the resources to achieve the goals as outlined within that particular curriculum. We need to do more to engage parents and get them involved, because parents are absolutely critical as it relates to helping children understand and value education. How do we get children more involved, get parents more involved? So when I think about the future and I think about how do we talk to policymakers, and I was thinking about one of the questions that gentleman was asked earlier about how do you convince people locally and nationwide and internationally that this is an important issue. They need to understand it's an investment. They are investing in the present, but they're also investing in the future. And if we want peace, if we want a civil society, if we want a stronger economy, we want a political system where people are involved, we need to do more to invest in education, to educate all the children. Studies show that if you educate the people, they are much more involved, much more engaged in our society, much more likely to go vote, much more likely to be engaged in their communities. And so we need to build and sustain our communities by investing in our young people who are going to be the future of America and the future of the world. We're living in a changing, transformative society, and we can't educate the way we've always educated. What do we need to do to prepare people for the future? A global, information-based, technological society. How do we help young people and old folks like me understand that this is a changing world and we have to transform the way we educate so that we better prepare people for the future? So when I think about where we are and where we're going, those are the challenges I see. And I think that NCA should be commended for hosting this event, for spreading the word, getting the word out about what we are trying to accomplish with the 17 goals we have before us. A lot of people have no idea what this is. They've never heard of the goals. So I think you're doing absolutely the right thing by having this kind of a session, and hopefully what the people here will do is go out and spread the word as well. My last point is going to be, if we hope to achieve the goals, we're going to have to work together. No one organization can do this by itself. Within the teaching community, that means we have to work with our educators, P20, preschool through graduate school. That means we're going to have to work with professional organizations, including the teachers' unions and the various organizations. We need to work with the parents. We need to work with the community as a whole. We have to convince the 75% of the people have no children in the schools. Why should they support the schools? 25% of the people have children in the school. Why should the other 75 support education? Because it's an investment in their future. It's an investment in their community and this country. And that's what I have to say.
Thank you so much. What you have to say is remarkable. No, thank you. What I'd like to do, that was a powerful opening for our panel. Thank you so much, Mary. Let me turn next to Pat. Pat, I'd like to turn to you and the question of empowering girls and women, which by many accounts is one of the most transformative aspects of this new agenda. Empowering girls and women and the equality of girls and women is a standalone goal, but it's also wired throughout the rest of the agenda in other targets and goals in very powerful and concrete ways. So let me ask you how you see these goals and this framework as helping advance meaningful change in the lives of girls and women, both here and abroad.
Great. Thank you so much, Ambassador Cousins. And I really want to also add my appreciation to UNA National National Capital Area for having this event and for really promoting a dialogue on this agenda. And I sincerely hope that this is the beginning of a dialogue and a 15-year effort that will, as we all hope, end up in 2030 with a better world. Question is, how are the SDGs driving meaningful change for women and girls here at home and abroad? And At Women Thrive, we really believe that the SDGs are a huge step forward for women and girls for three reasons. And they primarily have to do with sort of a distinction that we've been making between the MDGs and the SDGs. I think, for us, we really feel that the MDGs, really very important, huge effort. But we sort of felt that to some extent the MDGs were really dealing with the symptoms of poverty. And that the SDGs are attempting to address the root causes. And we really sort of see that as potential for significant and as, Tony Pippa was just saying, sustainable change. The SDGs, in focusing on the root causes of poverty, are looking to help us identify what are the things we need to do to end poverty. What are the things we need to do to end gender inequality, right? What are the things we need to do to end social exclusion, right? And so we really are looking at the causes, not just the symptoms. And for me, that is very exciting, and it is, in fact, the promise of the SDGs. I mean, if we only continue to treat the symptoms of poverty and inequality and violence, then, the goals, the global ills will persist. All right? But if we really attempt to address the root causes, we can really get to the point where, these issues are going to be eliminated. Now, for Women Thrive, we absolutely feel that if we are going to see a better world in 2030, we have to be promoting gender equality. We have to be promoting, women's voice and women's solutions. And that's what we do. Women Thrive has been in existence for 18 years. We're a leading advocacy organization that brings women's priorities and women's solutions to decision makers here in the U.S., at the UN, and in their countries as well. And we really believe that the SDGs open the door for what we at Women Thrive and our 200 partners, women's groups and civil society organizations in 50 countries know is the key to a better world. And what we see as the key is women's collective voice and women's collective advocacy. And I think it really is important for us to think about that and to understand what role that's going to play in promoting the SDG agenda, not only overseas, but also here in the United States. When women, and particularly women and girls living in poverty, meaningfully participate in international development policy and programs, we can get the best possible outcomes. Priorities that women and girls living in poverty have must be heard and heeded. We're just talking about education, and we know even though in terms of the MDGs we have gotten to almost parity in terms of enrollment, it gets back to what you were saying, Ambassador. That's only when we look at the aggregate statistics. But when we start to disaggregate within countries, we realize that, girls living in rural areas, girls from ethnic and religious and indigenous, minorities in countries, their enrollment rates have not really increased as much as we would have liked. And so we know that we have to go back and look at the issues in terms of gender equality. We have to look at the issues in terms of social exclusion and what those roots are if we're going to be able to see the kind of change that we want to in 2030. We in our work, what we do is we bring women and girls living in poverty, we bring them directly to decision makers so that they can have a say on what the agenda is, what the priorities are going to be, where we should be directing funding, what kind of programming and solutions really work. And I know we talk about how the SDGs have been more participatory than many of the UN processes, but I think that there's still more to go. We can pat ourselves on the back for that, but if, as we are making decisions about financing, if, as we are making decisions about programming and what programs work and what programs don't work, right? If women and girls are not at the table, right, to bring their perspectives. And if their perspectives and their priorities, their knowledge, their experience is not heard and heeded, right, which means then that the kinds of programs and policies and funding that we develop are based on their perspectives, we're not going to get far enough, right? Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, calls the SDGs the people's agenda, right? And what I want to suggest to you is that the people's agenda can only be the people's agenda if the people are involved. There are lots of mechanisms that are in place, for follow-up and for oversight that focus on government institutions, focus on perhaps, some participation in terms of civil society organizations. But we really need to ensure that everyone is involved and that everyone has the ability to give their perspective on what's working, what isn't working, and where we should be investing our time and our energy. In terms of, how Women Thrive is thinking about, in thinking about doing that, we are launching a new program called the Change Champions, and where we are mobilizing what we call everyday activists here in the U.S. to connect with women's groups and women's organizations that are part of our Global Partners Network, what we call our Alliance for Women's Solutions. And we are doing that so that they can be exchange of lessons like what we've talked about, so that women here can learn about what kinds of things work to address issues in developing countries, and can also then exchange in terms of what are the issues that we have here that we also want to be able to learn from, and most importantly, we're looking at really building up a collective agenda. All right, and a collective advocacy agenda on the kinds of things that we think need to be happening to make the world a better place for women and girls. One campaign that we have is called the No One Nowhere campaign, and it's to end violence against women. And it's a campaign that we have been working on, with our partners and also with supporters here in the United States. But my time is up, and I just want to basically say that, one, women's voices is important, particularly collective voice and collective advocacy. And if we really want to see the promise of the people's agenda in 2030, we have to find ways to mobilize everyone, everywhere, to be a part of this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And your time is not up. The baton will come back. So, let me turn next to Jenny Russell, Director of Global Development Policy and Advocacy for Save the Children. SAVE works on behalf of children both internationally and in the United States, and in some of the toughest environments. I'd love to hear you reflect a little bit on your experience as an organization with that reach, speaking a little bit about how the global goals can help you particularly reach those who are the most vulnerable. Jenny,
okay,
over to
thank you. And thank you, Ambassador Cousins and Tony Pippa, for your leadership on this agenda over the last 3 years. It has been extremely impressive, and both of you have been very committed to participation yourselves. And so in addition to kind of the commitment at the global level and the UN level in the U.S., I feel very strongly that that both of you have been very committed to U.S. organizations being involved and having a voice. So thank you for that, and thank you for this event and the dialogue that it's generating. I want to say, just by way of background, Save the Children has been involved in advocacy around this goal framework over the last 3 years. And Save the Children, as many of you know, was founded in 1919 in the aftermath of World War I to give kids rights and help them in war-ravaged Central Europe. From there, we've grown into a global movement of over 30 member organizations working in 120 countries, focusing on health, nutrition, education, and child protection. And we're a full spectrum organization. We work on humanitarian emergencies. We also work on development and public policy, advocacy, and research. And we work also in the United States, which is less known. I think we've worked here for over 80 years in about 26 states. And we work specifically with kids in deprived circumstances in small rural communities in particular. And our basic theory is working with kids to create a fresh start for them, and working with kids early in life. As many of you know, by age 3, a child's brain is 80% developed, yet only 2 out of 5 American kids are enrolled in preschool. And I very much agree with my fellow panelists about just the importance of early education and preschool for kids across the country. And similarly, there's a very small window between a woman's pregnancy and her child's second birthday, which is essential for nutrition in particular to prevent illness and stunting, which could affect a child's life permanently in terms of their learning and life potential. So Save the Children is very focused on this issue of early start. And with that background, we've worked over the past 3 years in terms of shaping this goal framework in that regard. And there's a question about both how Save the Children has tried to shape the framework, but also how the framework shaped us, and what kind of learning we have had over the past 3 years. And certainly in terms of how we tried to shape the framework, this issue of early start, specifically early childhood education, pressing for nutrition, pressing for health in the first 1,000 days. Also, we came to realize that, looking at the progress or lack thereof of the MDGs, that kids, particularly in places affected by conflict and fragility, were at most at risk and achieved the least amount of progress under the MDGs. And that was, and in addition to that, those facing discrimination and exclusion, had the least amount of progress. So in addition to that, we try to shape the global goals in terms of the Leave No One Behind agenda, the focus on addressing inequality, and issues around governance and accountability. And then turning to the question of how the goal framework in the last 3 years actually shaped Save the Children. So looking at kind of this issue of the lack of progress that we found across the world on the MDGs, it really made us realize that inequality of outcome was due to inequality of opportunity. So that if you give kids, again, the opportunity in the beginning of their lives, that they will have beneficial outcomes. So focusing on, again, the most deprived groups is what we are going to commit ourselves to over the next 15 years as this goal framework proceeds. And we are launching, we have decided to launch in large part due to our experience working in the MDG years and then shaping this framework. We are launching a 3-year global campaign in March 2016 focused on this issue of fair start for children and really looking at the main barriers which affect the most excluded kids in terms of accessing basic services. And that is looking at changes that we want to see at the local, regional, and global level related to 3 issues. One is sustainable financing for services. Other is ending discriminatory practices and policies. And the third is the accountability to children and the participation of children in helping to be empowered decision makers and advocates for their own welfare. So in sum, these global goals we have tried to shape them, but they have also shaped us and helped to advance our work. And we see that the future of our work is really going to be in this area of establishing global guarantees for kids, kind of a social compact for kids around health, education, and child protection to make sure that all kids are served by the next global goals. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Asma, let me turn now to you. Bread for the World is a real champion fighting hunger both in the United States and globally. And I'd ask you similarly to reflect on the interplay between the local, the national, and the global as you see it, and how these goals will help you in your work in combating hunger and poverty, and a bit about how you think we can engage Americans in the fight against hunger by virtue of this framework. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and I just want to echo Jenny's thanks to you for your leadership on getting us to this place. It is really a very hopeful time in history, and as an organization that works on domestic hunger issues where there has been relatively little to be hopeful about, I can't help but think that this moment might be the moment that changes history for people suffering from hunger here in the United States. So, during the MDG years and even before, the world has been making progress against hunger. That progress has been very slow, and it's been fairly mixed across countries. And today, it's been much slower than the progress against extreme poverty. So, clearly, a very specific intentionality on hunger was needed, and I think the SDGs really reflect that. So nearly 800 million people today suffer from hunger. The majority still live in rural areas. Women and girls are disproportionately affected by hunger. In the United States, there has been very little progress against hunger since the 1970s, and that was the last time that it was a political priority. And that there was political attention on the issue of hunger. The U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates that more than 48 million people are food insecure in the United States. That was in 2014, the latest data. And that's about 15.5% of the U.S. population. We've had stagnant wages for decades and rising inequality in this country. So the SDGs are, because of the universality of them, they provide a really huge opportunity to make progress against hunger here and to accelerate progress in countries around the world. And as Tony said, the SDGs really expand on the MDGs. And one of the big pieces from our perspective is really pulling hunger out of separating it and creating a standalone goal for hunger and malnutrition. So the second goal of the SDGs is ending hunger, promoting food security and improved nutrition for all, and through sustainable agriculture. So the other piece, in that very long name of that goal, you really get an unpacking of the thinking around hunger, and that really reflects new evidence around the importance of malnutrition and for development outcomes. So target 1 of goal 2 is ending hunger, and it really speaks to access to adequate food. But the second target is really focused on malnutrition. So it's a comprehensive definition of hunger. Hunger as a want of calories, but hunger also as a deprivation in terms of nutrients. And that definition, that broader definition really allows us to get at hunger here in the U.S. in a more specific way, because we don't see the kind of starvation or deprivation in calorie terms here in the U.S., but we are seeing huge amounts of micronutrient deficiency and lack of access to nutrient-rich foods, which is very much driven by hunger and poverty. And we know through lots of research and studies that good nutrition is linked to good health outcomes, is linked to increased productivity. In developing countries, there's been a number of studies that show that in countries where there's a very high level of malnutrition, it has a huge impact on economies. So you lose between 3 to 16% of GDP. depending on the country. 161 million children are stunted, which has long-term consequences for their earning potential and their health outcomes in developing countries. And 2 billion people in the world are micronutrient deficient. That's 1 in 3 people in the world is micronutrient deficient. And 1.9 billion people around the world are overweight or obese. In many developing countries, we're now seeing undernutrition in the same place, in the same country, city, as rising obesity. And you've got weak health systems that are not able to cope with these. And in the US, hunger and poverty have not been traditionally seen as a health issue. But this is beginning to change, and the focus on malnutrition and obesity in the SDGs will further add to taking a more comprehensive approach to health that includes addressing some of the factors that lead to poor health, the social determinants of health. So I think, for us as an organization, we work both on domestic and global hunger issues, and for a very long time, we took a very siloed approach, thinking about our domestic work separately from our international work. The MDGs, the real progress in thinking around nutrition, has really shifted our thinking on the domestic work that we do. And then I think the universality of this agenda is allowing us as an organization to think more holistically about the challenges that are, in a way, very similar in this country as they are around the world. I feel like the SDG, this moment, and the focus on leaving no one behind will be a way to talk to most Americans about this issue. A lot of people in this country are feeling left behind. And so the vision and the goal that this is an agenda for everyone, I think will invite more people into the agenda. The SDGs are, I think just thinking about the way forward in terms of how to engage the public, the SDGs built on the MDGs that were really, as countries were developing their plans to achieve the Millennium Development Goals, the national plans were, there was a lot of push to really engage civil society in countries and to have stakeholder consultations as those plans were being developed. I think as we think about the domestic, translating these goals into a domestic plan, we really have to think about engaging stakeholders at every level, community level, all the way through to the various departments that will be implementing a domestic plan. And that stakeholder engagement will also help build the political support and momentum that will carry us forward. We have about 15 months left in the Obama administration. And so we have our work cut out for us to really embed the SDGs over the next 15 months so that we don't miss a beat as we transition into a new administration. We've got 15 years left. A new administration could potentially occupy 8 of those 15 years. And so how quickly we move to really engage the US public on this issue and really help Americans embrace how this will transform the United States and the potential for children that are being born today and the future that they will inherit will be really important. And I also feel that the universality aspect of it, the domestic aspect of it, will help build support for U.S. support for U.S. global engagement abroad. I mean, I think at the moment, it's seen as a zero-sum game. If you invest abroad, you're not investing here at home, that the dollar only goes so far. But I think, the universality aspect could potentially change that frame. So I'll stop there. And
Thank you so much, Esma. Let me, Karen, I want to shift to you, Karen, and shift to the question about the role of the private sector. We've seen so much more discussion about the role of the private sector in advancing development, new understanding about the potential for partnerships of a variety of kinds, and being a real force for achieving the goals. And Tom's has a particularly interesting model in how you rely on customers in the U.S. And other countries to power your work in the wider world and to help people in various forms of need. If you could tell us a little bit about your experience and how you see the role of the private sector going forward in achieving the goals. Thank you.
Absolutely. And quadruple echoing the thanks for having me. I think this is wonderful. Just for me personally, this is very exciting. And for Tom's as an entity to be having this engagement on this type of platform, it's, I think, where we really hope our company can and should be. So I'm really excited to be part of just this collective information sharing. And it's something that we take very personally, and we're very proud about our role in this space of helping people figure it out. Sometimes it's interesting, depending on the space that I'm talking to, is how I categorize Tom's. And so sometimes I consider us private sector. Sometimes when I find myself in a room of truly private sector, I'm the social enterprise person. So it's always funny to which hat I'm wearing and what I'm representing. But
you'd be a great negotiator.
Exactly. Yeah, I could flip it in a second. So today, as the private sector, something, Asma, that you were saying that I found that working in this space and talking about what were the MGDs and now the global goals, or SDGs, the name change we were talking about at lunch, didn't help because so that trips people up. So it's always interesting to have that interface with people outside of this world. And so talking about that, but it does help. It's been tremendous to have this natural framework for people outside of our space that don't kind of imbibe and talk about this on a daily basis, that really have, starting from zero, it's an easy way to start to situate things that are going on in our own communities and globally. So I think that this is just very helpful in that regard. And then there's three main things that I just want to touch on real quick. First, just an overview of Tom's and our one-for-one model and kind of how we operate on the back end, and then going into what we've done as a company for SDG or global goal awareness, and then where we hope to take it in the future. So probably most people are familiar with Tom's Shoes, but we're a one-for-one company that actually has 4 different product categories right now. So we started with shoes, and that model is simple. You purchase a pair, you give a pair to a child in need. Our second product category was sight, so we went into first sunglasses and then optical, and the give on that is a really interesting model. So for every pair of sunglasses or optical that you purchase, you do provide sight restoration for somebody else here in the United States and globally. Our third category was coffee. So for every pound of coffee that you buy, you give somebody safe water. And then our fourth category is bags. So we launched a bag line, and it's connected to a safe birth give. So it's a little bit tricky to explain what that is, but essentially you're providing for the provision of an at-home delivery to go as smoothly as possible. And the way that we make all of this one-for-one happen is through our global partner network. So what we do is set up partnerships with organizations that do this for a living, like Save the Children, and then we create partnerships, and they are the ones that enact on the one-for-one promise. So it's really exciting where Tom situates now, because we have a partnership model that we have partners with over 90 different, I always say not-for-profit organizations, because they span the whole gamut of really small CBOs. We have phenomenal partners in Los Angeles that are working with kids in the LA community, up to huge UN organizations. We work with UNICEF, UNFPA, WFP, we kind of span the gamut. And then the other really interesting fact that I like to share is that Tom's, as a company, we try to present as we're very local and grassrootsy, but we're not. We're based in LA, but we're a multinational company that based in LA, but we have both retail and giving presence in more than 100 countries. We manufacture in 7 countries around the world. So we are global in scope, and it's something that we're learning as we go. Next year's our 10-year anniversary, so it's very exciting to be at this point. And over the last couple years, I joined Tom's about 3 years ago, and since I joined, we've been making more and more engagement in this space. So starting with CGI commitments, we have made CGI commitments, particularly as they pertain to our manufacturing. So diversifying our manufacturing outside of China. We committed at CGI to kind of go more global in our manufacturing and do 1/3 of our manufacturing outside of China. We're very happy now, just 2.5 years into that initiative, we're now at 40% of our manufacturing in our Giving Shoes is outside of China in 6 different countries, so that's been spectacular. We have made commitments to Every Woman, Every Child, both as they pertain to some exciting initiatives in the manufacturing space and also into our Safe Birth Give. And then now what the Global Goals is providing us as an organization is first a really exciting entry into the first thing that we've done is we spent the last couple years doing a lot of internal advocacy. So just getting folks within TOMS on board. I mean, it's always fun. One of my favorite things about my job is that, again, like I'm not always talking like among like. So I come from public health, so this was actually one of the biggest challenges for me at TOMS to be able to take things that we just take for granted on a daily basis and the verbiage we use and just our platform and shared understanding and try to transfer that to fashion designers that are wonderful people that do incredible things in their creative minds and brilliant thinkers, and their whole life is totally different than ours. So how do you make these connections across people that in industry, and not to take away any of their passion and dedication and drive and desire to do good, but they just don't know. It's not part of their reality. So a lot of internal advocacy, building, and just awareness. And then, so finally, we've gotten to this really exciting stage where we've built out on our website, so toms.com/global-goals. And what we're doing is tracking our impact as a company toward global goal realization. So we've done a lot of work on the giving side to understand how our metrics play out. So across our 4 gives, what percentage of those gives are going toward realization of the particular goals? So we did this with the MGDs, and that actually provided the basis for our data collection efforts that we launched about 3 years ago. And what it's done is allowed us to track that, understand what it is, and then start to put it out there in the world. So I won't bore you with the stats of what it is, but it's really cool. If you go to the website, you can see how it's broken out across goals 2, 3, 4, 6, and 8. And in 8, we're tracking essentially we're using that as a way to keep our promise towards our local manufacturing initiatives and the type of jobs that we're creating. So we work with all of our manufacturers, and because of this initiative to start manufacturing outside of China, we have created more than 700 jobs in those 6 countries. So we're extraordinarily proud of that. And I also always want to caveat that too, that people in China need jobs as well. So we do all of our manufacturing. We're very proud of those systems in China as well, and a lot of production that's happening there. And then kind of forward thinking, the initiative that I'm most excited about, that what I think that the SDG or global goals provide is, especially when it comes to the coffee water space. So part of my function is that I run our water giving. So again, when it comes to coffee, so for every pound of coffee we sell, we give safe water for a week. And the way that we do that is we have one primary implementing partner called Water for People. They're a US-based multinational that just does spectacular work in the water sector. And then we have a small partner in Colombia that we needed just to diversify our portfolio. And so what we wanted to do in our coffee was really make a new push toward corporate sales. So to get corporations to purchase Tom's Coffee, like corporate wholesale, like on the back end, so they have it in their offices and whatnot. And we've been trying to work on this for about a year and getting this, like, what is the pitch exactly? So how can we get people excited about this initiative? So I'm a big Lebowski fan, and I was even thinking, like, don't say this, but I'm going to say it. So, like, when the global goals came together, you know, it's like they were the things it's the rug that pulled the room together. So SDG 6 is my rug, and I'm able to, like, now really peg around this idea. So when we can go and pitch to other corporations and other for-profit companies, like, why they should put Tom's Coffee into their offices, into their lineups, and it's really because we, as a company, as Tom's, can help them track their impact toward realization of Global Goal 6. So this is kind of the future and where we want to take these initiatives. And so it's very exciting to be here because I'm just learning. I'm scribbling notes, as you can see, because I'm always looking for ways to better understand what this is, understand what different organizations are doing, start to get little nuggets I was talking about this in the panel before, but usually I get about 3 minutes to make my coffee pitch, and I'm not a salesperson, so I'm really bad at it, but I'm getting a lot better. But where I start from, mostly in LA as well, is like zero. I mean, I'm talking to decision makers and companies that will give me about 3 minutes of time, and I have to start from, are you aware of the global goals for sustainable development? Nope. What about Millennium Development Goals? Nope. And like my clock is ticking right there. So then how you have to back up, squeeze all that in, and then make the pitch as to why they should spend a little more money to help me realize SDG 6. So anything I can learn to package that a little better is appreciated.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you, Garrett. Terrific. And you will have noticed that Dr. Futrell had to leave. She had a teaching commitment. But we're going to thank her in her absence. Bruce, let me then turn last to you to focus on our own backyard here in Washington. You have extensive experience working at all levels, global, national, and very local. Where do you see the connections across these different levels, and how do you see these global goals as being able to affect real change in real people's lives right here? Thanks.
Well, maybe the real answer is I'm not sure. And I personally, just given my own background, I can't help but be so gratified and excited by what we've pulled together here, and having seen the kind of aspirational thinking and the pulling together that the MDGs kind of engendered. I'm so encouraged by what we're doing here, and yet kind of wearing the hat of, the head of the Community Foundation and being a citizen of Washington, D.C., I'm maybe a little like you, Karen, as you think about how do I use this in a practical way. I mean, the Community Foundation should be tailor-made for this. The Community Foundation for the National Capital Region, we raise community philanthropic resources to spend on real local community development, or advocacy and grant making. Last year we granted about $60 million in the region, and I think over 40 years we've granted over $1 billion to about 8,000 organizations working very locally, and we span the 17 goals. We're not focused on one thing. We're focused on poverty. Our donors care about the breadth of issues. That's part of the beauty of a community foundation. It's education, it is health, it is poverty, it is hunger. And we do it in a city, in a context where it's very appropriate for us to be thinking about the goals and the challenges that drive the thinking of the Global Development Goals. Rates of poverty here, I mean, in both in relative and absolute senses. I mean, 18% of our citizens live in poverty. 27% of kids in D.C. live below the poverty line. 10% of our residents in extreme poverty. In terms of inequality, I think our Gini coefficient in D.C. is actually higher than any country on it. Now, we're comparing cities to countries, and by most measures, we're among, if not the most unequal city in the United States. I think the top 20% of income earners in this city earn about 7 times what the bottom 20% earn. 40% of our kids don't graduate from high school. Even in terms of Goal 16, it's inarguably the case that in terms of access to representative government, D.C. doesn't cut it. So, we ought to be sort of tailor-made for embrace, both as a city and as an institution that I represent, of the Global Development Goals. And yet I'm not sure. I don't know that an explicit embrace of the sustainable development, what does that achieve for us in additive terms? And I mean additive terms. At a local government level, it's a tricky sell. Just given the politics, any U.S. politics around UN-ish, world government, China, I'm not sure that applies quite so readily in D.C., but there's a little bit of, we're already focused on these problems. It's not like the mayor doesn't know that these are problems. And I think particularly in situations where local state governments, you can't run deficits, to choose to embrace one of the Global Development Goals is to de-emphasize another. So it's a little bit tricky here in terms of how you think about an embrace of all the Global Development Goals from a government or from, again, additively. I mean, can an explicit embrace of any one of those goals as a development goal or across the board as the development goals be additive as a prompt to changes in policy or as a prompt to allocating additional resources? And I think it's tricky at a government level. I think for our institution, for the Community Foundation, there are ways to think, and Ed Elmendorf and I have actually had this conversation. Some of our donors actually, particularly in DC, are from the international community. And by virtue of being donors with us, they have an interest in things that are community-based. And so our ability to tell our story and to advocate to them around the global development goals, I think does have promise. Now, I'm not entirely skeptical on all of this. I think maybe in terms of the U.S. government and where the U.S. government itself may go as it attempts to spell out what are our own commitments here, does that, are there additional resources that might, given how our government works, I don't know, are there additional resources that might be available to D.C. as the pilot city for our implementation of the Global Development Goals? Maybe. Maybe there's a there. I know that for all of us, the kind of universality that has been embraced by the Global Development Goals as opposed to the Millennium Development Goals, I think goes a long way to doing the things that Tony was talking about at the beginning in terms of our borrowing from best practices elsewhere. What was it, Lessons Across the Border? Was that the program? I mean, I'm very well aware of in microfinance or as we think about payments or we think about applications of, behavioral economics in a developing country context addressing the MDGs. I think now there's more kind of room and permission to do that as we think about, in universal terms, about approaches to problem solving. And I think just this idea of a broad and ambitious and aspirational framework that's very specific and data-driven in its targeting. Wouldn't be great if we as the Community Foundation or we as a city could say by 2030, here's the city we envision living in, here are the specific topic areas in which we will focus. This was what that means. And here, from a really data-driven way, is how we'll know if we're doing it or not, would be a really great thing to do. Whether you call that our kind of the way we sign up for the Global Development Goals or not. At the end of the day, it contributes, I think, to overall what we're collectively trying to do. So.
Thank you. You answered your own question brilliantly.